sure we'll all come away with some new ideas based on their offerings. And I'm sure they'll probably have some reactions that tie into what Vail and Chris said earlier. And then we especially hope that all of you will interact with them after their brief presentations with a lot of Q&A and lively discussion. So let me introduce, first of all, here, let's go down to that far end because it's my notes. That would make a lot more sense. We have from here at First Unitarian Church, Allison Schwartz and Ray Ann Olander. Al is a longtime, very active member who co-chairs the annual budget drive and has been a veteran member of that committee. And Ray Ann is a past board co-chair and past co-chair of the annual budget drive committee. Next, I'm going to jump to my friend Betty Luck, who is from Allegheny UU Church. Betty is VP of the Allegheny Board and co-chairs their stewardship campaign. This is Miriam Yagler from the Kent UU Church in Ohio. She is also an OMD board member. And finally, our consultant guest is Sandy Lindahl from the Ackley Consulting Group. We mentioned Sandy briefly earlier. She consults on church campaigns, obviously, and she is a minister for holistic stewardship within the United Church of Christ and is a veteran fundraising executive. So we are very grateful to have them here with us, and we ensure that we'll have a lively discussion. Joan has a few insights to share as we lead into the panel, and then she will moderate the discussion. Joan?
So while our panelists are gathering their thoughts, because we'll ask each one of them to tell us what their congregation is doing that's exciting or new or something that they want to share with you. So while they're gathering their thoughts and deciding who will go first, okay, I have just a brief little letter that I wanted to share with you. It's from Michelle Buchheit. Some of you remember her. She was my intern last year, and she was our youth and young adult consultant here in the district. And she recently sent me this letter about her congregation, her new congregation in Spartansburg, South Carolina, where she's the new minister. She says, I want to share with you a cool thing we're doing for our annual fund campaign this year. A little background. We're focusing on financial health and helping folks figure out where they are and can do that, how they can do that. And then figure out what their income-based pledge might look like, based on their financial health and their investment in the life and programming of the church. To that end, they created some quizzes that can be taken online or on paper, and they're on the website up there, that would provide a mechanism for reflecting on financial health and what that might mean for one's individual contributions to our congregation. And she says when you open the link, there's some explanations, and then the quizzes are on the side. She said, we're also offering a financial health workshop with special invitations to young adults and young families. And it will be after church with a free lunch. Yes. And there they will also have the paper versions of the quizzes on hand if participants want to fill them out or if they need help. And they will also have great heaps of play money. Because they do an exercise where participants can see where their monthly income goes in concrete terms. We're trying to balance information with an experiential and a fun approach. And added to all that, she says, we solicited affirmations from people back in September. For the first 20 who gave us a narrative about how the UU Church of Spartansburg has changed their lives, they gave them a $5 Amazon gift card. And if they go to Amazon through their website, they also get a percentage, which she says is a win-win. They quickly received 22 affirmations in a congregation of less than 180. And they have been having one affirmation printed in their monthly newsletter and one live affirmation on the first Sunday of each month. They want to create a culture where we hear our people's stories all of the time, and not just when they're actively seeking contributions. So it's part of the year-round stewardship. And now that they're into their campaign, they will have affirmations weekly, live, every Sunday. And they've obtained permission to use quotes in the annual fund materials. And she says the quotes are awesome. She's been blessed with a really creative stewardship council chair who feels called to a vital ministry, and an amazing web communications director who's been able to take this vague idea of create something like a quiz in a women's magazine interactive tool for congregants to use. And it's on their website right there. All of the pieces went through a lot of variations and testing and revising, and then they went live. And she says, I'm sure that as we go through the next month, we'll discover things that need tweaked, and that's all instructive, and we will put that to good use. But what really thrills me, she says, is the interactive nature of the website and this whole program and campaign, and how it can help congregants think in different ways, not as consumers, but think with joyful abundance about their pledge to the mission of our church. And oh yes, we've been deeply inspired by J. Cliff Christopher's book, Not Your Parents' Offering Plate. And if you haven't read it yet, she says, go to Amazon, buy it through the uucs.org website if you want to spread the love a little bit and get copies for your whole board. So that's the story from Spartansburg, South Carolina. Alrighty, let's hear our stories now. We have a microphone here, just in case we need it. And Mary will start.
And I have some materials to pass out.
Chris is behind.
To a program budget. How many of you are using a program budget rather than like line item? Yeah, well, we have both, but we share the program budget. And anybody who wants to see the line item budget, you know, it's there if they want to look at it. They want to see how much the electric bill was. But, so we have a copy of what we came up with for our program budget. And our theme last year was, we had a pie theme. What ingredients do you bring to the pie? And inside the first page is information about the church and that this is a program budget and who to contact with questions. Then we have our mission, because everything we do has to go back to our mission. And what we emphasized is the areas, program areas that are supported by our stewardship. And that's on page 3. Worship and music, the community within, lifespan learning and spiritual growth and development, social justice and community outreach, income generation, UU and interfaith connections. Then the following pages are devoted to each of those areas, and we list all the programs that our stewardship supports. So I was amazed when we started listing the programs. It's, you know, it's just, looks like a couple of hundred programs. And our staff, and they did it again this year, they did a time study to figure out how much of their day is devoted to each of these programs. And that's how we decided these percentages. Then we actually, after those programs, we listed the staff positions: full-time minister, 3/4 time DRE, 3/4 time congregational administrator, 3rd time music director, and 4th time sexton. And the next page is the projected revenue, where the money comes from. So pledges are a big piece of the pie, and people can see that. The following page is the projected revenues and dollar amounts that'll go to each one of those, our projected expenses then. And then there's a page, and it shows how many pledge units we have in each category, dollar-wise, because people are always curious about that. And on the very last page is a suggested fair share giving guide. So about a week before we were going to start canvassing, we sent this, a pledge card, and a letter from our minister, Melissa Carvel-Zimmer, to 150 projected pledge units. And these people were identified as people who either pledged or were donating regularly. So we didn't canvass anybody who was not already giving to the church, whether regularly or one big lump sum or however they did it. And I think that takes a lot. In the past, we really didn't know when we got a list of names who was giving what. So now we're able to identify the people that are actually giving, and I think that takes a lot of the stress off canvassers. And this year we're going to go, Melissa's going to write 4 different letters to address 4 different groups of givers. So we're still in the process of composing those letters, but that's how we're going to do it this year. We're going to mail the same thing. And we're also revising the brochure, and we're going to identify things that we were able to increase. Kate, do you have a... What were those items that we were able to increase last year?
Increase adult religious education programs, increase social justice giving.
Well, yeah, and there were some specific requests that we were able to, I know Hal got some money for the music committee so that we could have guest musicians. And this year, we're also identifying things that we want to increase the budget again, of course. And so we're also going to identify the items that we would be able to fund if we get the increase in the new budget. We trained our canvassers. We matched our canvassers financially by the amount they give with the people they're going to be canvassing. We had articles in our electronic newsletter every week, articles in the insert to the order of service, a video presentation was set up at coffee hour in the social hall, which was really popular. There were photographs from across, a couple of years, and those rotated with the pie theme, and everybody loved that, seeing pictures of themselves and their kids and other people they knew. We do the whole month of March, so every Sunday in March, we had someone give a musical creative announcement during announcements, and those were pretty entertaining. We have that lined up again this year, and all these other things. We also had, what do you call them, affirmations? We call them testimonials. Before the offering every week, someone did a testimonial. And we also have a check mark, I think it's on the pledge card, asking if we could if we could publicize their names when they made a pledge. So every Sunday in the insert in the order of service, we listed the names of those who had pledged the previous week that gave us their permission. We mailed thank you notes to everybody who pledged. And the last Sunday, we had a celebration, and we had a free piece of pie for everybody in the congregation. They were all cut up and spread all the way down the table, and I think they all went.
We ought to eat.
Did I miss anything, Kay?
No, and basically I think the pie idea was just to get people used to not having a line item budget. Right. That they would be seeing.
Yeah. Oh, another thing that we did that was really important, I think, is we asked the canvassers to make their contacts during the first 2 weeks. And on the 3rd week, I met with our administrator and got the names of the people who had not pledged yet and emailed the canvassers who had those names and asked for a status. And I continued to do that for the rest of the campaign. And then when it was over, I made a few phone calls, and then we sicked Melissa on them. And so it was very effective in the end. I think there were only a couple of people who had not pledged, and they may have been out of the country or something, and we just weren't able to contact them. So, and it was encouraging because our administrator was able to add up all the pledges, and she'd tell me every week, if everybody pledges that pledged last time, we're going to make the budget. So, you know, it's nice to hear those kinds of words too. And part of our training was that we gave the canvassers, talked about a lot of the things that have been talked about today. You know, how to approach, questions to use, role playing, and we're going to do that again this year. Any questions, or do you want those?
Let's hear everybody's story first, and then we'll have some questions that the whole panel can deal with. Hey, who's next? And do you want to sit and use the microphone, or come on up here?
I'll just sit here because we're sharing notes.
Okay.
So I've been working on our annual budget drive committee for many years, and we realized we needed to make a change. So in the past, we've done some very basic, sending out letters, calling people, we've tried visiting campaigns, those sorts of things. So last year, we hired consultant Mark Ewert, who's part of the UUA, to come and work with us. And I'm going to let Rayanne talk a little bit about some of the big changes, but he encouraged us to use new terminology. So we became the annual budget drive committee, whereas previously we'd been the canvas committee. It's no longer canvas, it's an annual budget drive. And that way everybody knows exactly what it's about, because some people say, canvas? What's that? Especially if they're not coming from a prior church environment. We also call our canvassers visiting stewards now, because they're going to go out and visit, and they are stewarding our congregation. We call it a commitment and not a pledge, because they are making a commitment to this church. So Mark spent some time with us last year. We weren't really ready to get started on what he was doing because we started the process too late in our budget drive cycle. So this was the real year that we were implementing it. And he came and did a visiting stewards orientation with us. We involved the board, we involved our committee. We encouraged as many members of the congregation as possible to participate in that orientation to learn what this was all about. And Mark's real encouragement is the way the visit goes is a 4-part process. I'm going to tell you my story about why this church community is important to me. Something special that's happened to me here. It could be little, it could be big, it doesn't matter. Then I want you to share your story with me. And this is that connection we've been talking about today. After that, maybe I say there's an awkward transition, maybe I don't, but I move into the money aspect. And one of the things he's encouraged us to do is to use a worksheet that allows you to plug in your income levels, where your money comes from, allows you to deduct various expenses that are not accommodated for in other ways, and gives you an idea of what kind of income you're using to establish your commitment value. He also uses the same guideline to show people what we consider a fair share. We start our fair share commitments at 3% of that income number. He likes to think of that as a social justice document because I'm not asking everybody to commit the same amount. I'm asking them to look at their own personal circumstances and be thoughtful and generous about what they commit to the church. And that is part of the conversation the visiting stewards will have. Did you use that form? Did you understand it? Can I help you with it? Please take a moment now. I'm going to walk away. I'm going to let you put your commitment in a sealed envelope. I'm not going to tell you what to give. I'm not going to look at what you're giving. That's your personal commitment. And then the biggest and most important part is thank you. Thank you for taking this time to be with me. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for your commitment to the church, both financially and otherwise. So this has been a huge culture shift for our church, and we're still in the process of working on it. Rayanne is a newer member of our committee, so she's coming in and sort of starting out with this process. So I'm going to let her take over and talk a little bit more about what we've done.
Okay, so as Al said, it's newer for me, so I think that I've had probably a level of excitement about it that's annoying Al sometimes. I'll say something, I'll say, yay, let's go, and Al did that about, 6 or 7 years ago. So it has been a culture shift. And so to take you back 2 years ago, actually Mark came and met with our congregation 2 years ago and did some small group meetings with lots of the different groups, affinity groups and working groups of the congregation, and then talked with us about not only our financial stewardship, but our human capital campaign, and that kind of touched that off. And so, as Al said, we started a little bit too late with him to take full advantage of using him over the course of that budget drive, but we did use that opportunity to start changing the language and to start to introduce elements of what we were doing. We had planned a large fellowship event that used to always happen in this congregation to kind of kick off the financial campaign, and so we used that appreciative inquiry part of the stewardship conversation at the tables at the campaign, and we started to shift the language. So that was kind of we're actually in the going into the third year, so it was that kind of stage setting. And then last year, Mark actually came in and he conducted an orientation for the visiting stewards, which Al mentioned. That was, that had its ups and downs. We were concerned because people had their defenses up. And we talked with Mark about this a lot, and he said just invite them to a no strings attached orientation so that they understand. And it really is important because even if you're going to be visited, you need to understand what that visit's going to be. And in fact, we ran into folks who didn't really understand, didn't come to the orientation, had not, and we just communicated until we thought we were blue in the face. We had, actually Mark encouraged us to get a person to do our communications. So we have a woman here who's a writer and does fabulous communications. And she communicated a lot, and still people didn't really understand. Someone in particular sent David an email, called David, Reverend Herndon, and said, I don't want to visit, I don't need a visit. And so Al sent her actually a lovely email saying, that's fine, but the visit is about connections, and a little more than that. And she said, okay, I'll take a visit. And then, actually we ran into her in a restaurant a couple of months ago, and she said, I had a lovely time. It was so nice to reconnect. And so we heard so many wonderful stories about that reconnection. But some of those folks felt a little blindsided by the process. Like they came to the no strings attached orientation, and then a part of Mark's presentation was to say, okay, well now we're asking everybody who's here to take 4 names. And some of those people said, whoa, we don't want to take 4 names. And in truth, most people did. So I think what we learned is to be a little more upfront with folks about that. To be fair to us, we did talk with him about that, and he said, oh, almost nobody refuses. And that's true, but some people were uncomfortable. Now, some of those folks were really excited about having done it. So I think I think he knew that if we were upfront about it, we wouldn't have gotten people in the room. We did 2 sessions, a morning session and an afternoon session. And so ultimately it was very successful in terms of turning the culture. We still didn't make our goal, but I think that the culture is evolving. The other thing that he really encouraged us to do is to, when I joined the Budget Drive Committee, everybody kind of did everything. And he's really encouraged us to recruit more people and to have very focused assignments. So we have people who are responsible for getting testimonials, people who are responsible for providing food for the events that we do, people who are responsible for the communications, and then Al and I are responsible for kind of overseeing it. So, so those are some of the lessons learned. And we need to start earlier. We start in the fall, and then it's the summer months. You get lulled into thinking that everything's under control. So we're starting Monday night, actually. Anyway, so
I want to talk to you about what we do in Allegheny. And first, I want to give you a little background. Allegheny has about 85 members. We are a 100-plus-year-old congregation in a diverse neighborhood in Pittsburgh. We are housed in our original building, and we also also maintain another building, which is owned by the UUA, but we have responsibility for it, the Unitarian House. We have a full-time minister, we have a part-time RE director, and we have a part-time director of worship music. We made a commitment when we went to full-time ministry 2 years ago and added staff that we would grow into financial health by growing our membership. At the time, we were dipping heavily into savings to cover our budget, which was seriously out of balance. Partly because of the large building maintenance needs that just couldn't be postponed for another day. We had to take care of some things. So we're making some progress in our numbers growth, but we're not nearly where we need to be yet. As a backdrop to this picture, add that the culture of stewardship and financial giving was based on the assumption that the church was peopled by members who were suffering in weak financial times, could not afford to give much, did not want to be badgered about money matters, and did the best they could to give to the annual canvas, but it wasn't enough. Financially, to be blunt, we were not even barely getting by. We had generous savings that we were relying on far too heavily, and we were depleting far too quickly. So, back to the present. 3 years ago, the Stewardship Committee changed hands. Again, the new chairperson, who is Mark, sitting back here, Tomlinson, recruited a few other folks who didn't have a long history with the background that I just described. And as a new team, we started looking objectively at our situation and challenging the assumptions about money that we were experiencing. We decided to move away from those assumptions, and rather than wring our hands over our lack of resources, we chose to approach our situation from a place of abundance. We knew that we had members who could afford to get us rolling, so we began to talk to those people directly, to wine and dine, if you will, to thank them for their generosity over the years and their commitment and support of the church that meant so much to us all. The first gathering we had with those people, they said, nobody has ever thanked us before. We challenged our leaders to give financially to set an example for the rest of the congregation. We held up our newly crafted mission statement to celebrate life, nourish the spirit, and inspire a commitment to justice. And we challenged people to be stewards of our history-rich church so the future generations would have a liberal religious home in the urban center of Pittsburgh. We read books about stewardship, we attended conferences, we wrote blogs, we studied best practices. We're still learning and trying to figure out what works best, but we've raised the annual canvas by nearly 50%.
Wow.
Still not where we need to be, but a significant improvement. And we institutionalized an end-of-year campaign based on a message of generosity and gratitude. And it's that end-of-year campaign success that I really want to share with you. At the end of 2011, a member got a really generous bonus from her workplace and made a decision to share a bunch of it with the church. Hoping to leverage that gift, she challenged the highest donors at a special event for the purpose to also put in what they could to a pot, which we would then use to further challenge the congregation. Those donors came through at a level never seen before at Allegheny. We took that matching pot to the congregation and set a time limit of 4 weeks to match it. Secretly, we didn't really expect it. Publicly, we were confident and encouraged. In 4 weeks, we more than doubled the pot, and that from a congregation that had never had a significant significant fundraiser at the end of the year. It is amazing, we've heard this before today, it's amazing what happens when you ask. We did a little cajoling where it seemed appropriate, but mostly we just asked and thanked, and we showed appreciation and held up our mission. The result was a balanced budget at mid-year for the first time in anyone's recent memory. And the projected fiscal year deficit was lowered by 70% when the church year came to a close. It was a new deficit that we felt we could live with, and in fact, that we could sustain for 2 more years while we worked on numerical growth and other stewardship efforts. This year, we repeated the process to a large extent, building on our experience. Of course, no 2 years are exactly alike. Various life events and other occurrences happened in our rather small congregation, and that affected our bottom line this year somewhat. And yet we still exceeded all earlier expectations in both dollar amounts and numbers of donors. We were able to raise the amount written into the budget because now that we had a success, now we're part of the budget. But we exceeded it, not by very much, but we exceeded it. And we again ended the mid-year in the black for the 2nd year in a row. That never happened in the recent memory of any of the present membership. So we still have a lot of work to do. We've strengthened the annual canvas. We've created growing present financial health. And over the course of the last year, we also spearheaded the creation of an endowment fund, which had never existed before. We had our first very generous donation to that fund that was made during our end-of-year campaign this past December. So a longtime member and a board member said a few weeks ago that the feeling around money at Allegheny has definitely changed. And people are no longer afraid to talk about it. We don't talk about need so much, although it's kind of hard not to talk about need. We talk about possibilities. We don't talk about line item budgets so much. We talk about mission and covenant and stewardship. And we believe the old assumptions of scarcity are being won over. And it's
Well, I was asked to take the role of being somewhat of a reflector on some of the trends that you're all talking about and that are happening in other places. And I have to say that I'm so encouraged by what I'm hearing here today. And I hope that you see the good experiences among you, I certainly do, and take home some new ideas to try. The one thing that to me is pulling this all together is seeing you try to live out in your stewardship efforts, live out your values as a specific church, a particular group of people, the beliefs and values and principles that you hold. And I think the more that you do that, the more successful you will be in helping people to get over our fears of talking about money, to know that money is not the only part of being good stewards, to help move in this kind of a positive direction. So what does that mean? Well, you know your 7 principles. And to the ministry of stewardship, just like you do so seriously when it comes to worship and how you treat each other and doing justice ministry, I think that will help you to maybe get a new perspective. And I'm hearing that in some of these stories. I heard it in the presentations earlier. For example, to treat everyone with dignity. To know that we're all at a different place along life's journey, that we have different experiences. So what does that mean in terms of approaching people for supporting the ministry? It means things like knowing that you have to ask to receive, as was said this morning. Knowing that you have to say thank you, as you just said, say thank you in order to be able to ask again, but also because it's just the right thing to do. And not to take for granted impact statements, impact stories. when Chris was talking about storytelling earlier, I thought, oh yeah, that's what I call impact stories. Tell the difference that someone's giving is making, and let them know that today this is happening in our church, and because you give, this can happen. Not to take for granted that people know, because in a lot of the UU churches, as well as in the United Church of Christ, the community that I'm a part of, we have people coming in from all sorts of different backgrounds, other denominations, people who have had very little formal experience with church, and we can't anymore assume like we used to be able to. So lots of things are changing, and that was another piece that I heard today, that to be in touch with people the way that we live our lives now. There's so many ways that that happens, but this is not something set aside from the rest of church. And Chris made that point very strongly. To make these things part of our regular practice makes such a difference. And in the story about the Indian villagers putting aside the scoop of rice, what I liked about that was it relates to so much of what you've talked about. Your good practice of pulling people together as community, gathering the whole. They did it all together. It wasn't just there was no pressure on one household or another. We did it all together. People did it as a regular practice. So this idea of year-round stewardship, just think of that, putting aside the rice, it's a regular practice. And so it's something normal and usual and part of everyday life. They did it together in community, and they did it for the purpose of the whole. So there are lots and lots of wonderful pieces that I have learned from you today, and I want to thank you for the good work that you're all doing and encourage you to keep learning from one another.
Can we hear some gratitude for our panelists?